Good evening, Houdat Nation, and happy Thursday to our Bayou Blitz family. Yeah, that's right. Brendan and I have flexed our muscle again and showed the power to move days of the week for you and your Bayou Blitz podcast, of which I am Bob Rose. I am one of your co-hosts to your show, the Bayou Blitz, on this Thursday, June 15th, I think it is.
There you go.
Joining me is my more confident, calendar reading partner, Brendan Boylan. How are you tonight, Brendan?
I'm cheating, man. I'm on a Mac, so it says it right
Fair.
on the bottom. So,
Fair.
don't give me all the credit in the world. I'm doing okay. It's interesting time for everybody right now in the sports world. I saw a tweet or an Instagram post yesterday. It said it was like the dog days of summer, and it had, I might have to just pull it up so I give accurate numbers, but like the amount of days until every major season comes back. So here it is. This is from yesterday. Yeah, so as of yesterday, officially entered the dog days of summer. 74 days till college football, 86 days till NFL, and then so on and so forth. So it's a long time coming. Obviously, baseball fans, they still have their, still have your season. And other than that, yeah, I can't get into baseball until playoff time anyway. Personally, I'll go watch a game, like a minor league game. You're not in agreement there. You haven't taken Will. Do you have any minor league ballparks close by?
Yeah, we have the Washington Wild Things about 20, 30-minute drive from us. And then of course, the Pittsburgh Pirates, an alleged Major League Baseball team, plays downtown, which is on game day probably takes an hour, to get yourself to the stadium from where I live, counting traffic, parking, and all that. But I used to go to Pirate games all the time. I used to go to the occasional Indian or Orioles game too, because they're not too far of it's a nice little road trip. But the year that the baseball strike canceled the season in mid-season, actually early season, I think, and they didn't bother coming back, meaning that there was no World Series, hence no champion. Any professional sport that, for greed, does away with their championship, I'm done with. You're not going to see another cent of my money. So no, I have not taken Will. I have not gone myself. I would not accept free tickets to any major league or major league affiliated baseball team. Period.
That's tough. I like going. I enjoy it every now and again. I can't do it like I used to. I used to go, if there was a homestand series, I'd be at 2 of the 3, 3 of the 4. I can't do that anymore. I'm just old now, I guess.
Wait.
Oh yeah, just wait. I know. No, but it's a weird time for the Saints. It's a weird time for every team in the NFL as mini camp, OTAs kind of time, but and you have your headlines. We've kind of hinted about this the last couple shows. It's weird because your headlines are so and so was at camp, so and so's performed well, and you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
I do want to go ahead and address what we have on the bottom of the screen. You might even throw Michael Thomas in that as well. Seen Michael Thomas, seen Alvin Kamara, seen Taysom Hill. Guys that people were concerned about in the last show that we did even popped up in the comments. Why isn't Taysom Hill? Why isn't Alvin Kamara? Well, they've never done the OTA thing, but they've showed up when it's mandatory, and they've showed up now. And got to see some highlights, right? The same social media team posted for the lovely people that aren't down at camp. Just a little bit of glimpses of the future in car to Kamara on like a Texas route. We saw a couple photos and whatnot of Michael Thomas in a helmet. You can't say full uniform, but at least in a helmet.
Right.
And on the field and healthy and looking like he's ready to go. So let's start there. And actually, I kind of want to start with Taysom Hill because Taysom Hill was the interesting one with the photos and the videos that came out. Was going into this season, we still don't really know what is Taysom Hill. And the Saints are continuing to use Taysom Hill in multiple roles, at least here at the beginning of mini camp. So way too early, Bob. But what can Saints fans expect from Taysom Hill this year based off what you've seen so far in minicamp?
Brendan, Saints fans can expect the same things that we have seen from Taysom Hill since 2018. I do find it interesting that Dennis Allen and the media observers went out of their way to point out that Taysom is still taking quite a few reps at quarterback. And that Dennis Allen went out of his way to say that they still haven't defined a role for Taysom Hill, that he's still meeting with multiple position coaches, attending multiple positional group meetings. So I'm not going to say that we don't know what Taysom Hill is, because we do know what Taysom Hill is, and that is Taysom Hill. He's going to continue to work out of the backfield. He's going to continue to see some reps at tight end, H back, off ball, move tight end, whatever terminology you want to use, out of the slot, wildcat quarterback, certainly taking direct snaps from center as both a runner and a thrower. That's just what Taysom Hill is going to continue to be. That's what his career is. He's not this far along. In his NFL career, I would not expect Taysom Hill, to make a full-time move to tight end. Certainly not quarterback. I think the full-time quarterback experiment has finally been acknowledged to be gone. But Taysom Hill's best, most valued asset is his versatility, and to define him in a position, or pigeonhole him into a specific role, that takes away from what he does best for this New Orleans Saints offense. And that is taking snaps out of the backfield, wildcat quarterback, wildcat running back, off the ball, move tight end, inline tight end, special teams contributor, punt protector, gunner, on kickoffs. Those are the things that Taysom Hill does, has done, and will continue to do.
You're almost handcuffing Taysom Hill when you give him like a full job description. Sometimes it's better to just leave it open. And that's what Taysom Hill has been for New Orleans. The one comparison I think that a lot of people draw to when it comes to Taysom Hill in terms of his versatility, a guy that played in your neck of the woods, in Slash and Cordell Stewart, but Taysom Hill's an even better version of that.
Mm-hmm.
Because while Stewart was certainly an electrifying player, he was a little too early. People didn't know what to do with him. And it takes a special coach to kind of figure that out. And we will, tip our cap to Sean Payton for seeing something and finding a role. Even if that role is just defined as football player. They found a role and they made it happen. I mean, if Cordell Stewart were to have fell into that situation all those years ago, we might look at Cordell Stewart's career a lot differently.
Yeah.
Because of how versatile of a threat that he was. Now, Taysom Hill does a couple more things than Cordell Stewart. Stewart was really just running back, quarterback, receiver, while Taysom Hill is quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, offensive line, defensive line. I'm just kidding. Head coach, assistant coach. I'm just kidding. But I mean, in all honesty, it's that is what, and Bob and I harped on this all year last year, especially when they were trying to make the permanent move to tight end for Taysom Hill. It was like, no, just let Taysom be Taysom. And when the Saints were able to do that effectively, the Saints won football games.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, I'll say this throughout this offseason and going into next year, and especially if the Saints struggle early, is the games in which Taysom Hill ran the ball 9 times, the Saints were undefeated. Like, that is a crazy, silly stat. And you might say, well, Brendan, there's not a lot of correlation there. To me, there is. When you get the ball into a playmaker's hands more, you win more games.
Right. I would say there's not a correlation if it happened maybe 2 or 3 times, perhaps even 4. 9 games, 9 wins. That's a trend, my friend.
I mean, it was a weird trend. It was one that I certainly wasn't particularly looking for, but as well as I do, when you're writing articles and you're coming up with ideas, you start seeing those trends. And you're like, hey, wait a minute. The Saints have won, back-to-back games or whatever. Okay, Taysom got 9 carries in each game. And then you go back and you look at the games the Saints lost. You go, oh, Taysom only had 3 or Taysom only had 1. I love what the Saints have done with Taysom Hill. Obviously, you alluded to the quarterback experiment when he had to come in and he started, what was it, 4 or 5 games for the Saints? Was it 4 and he went 3-1? Am I right?
At the last stint, yeah.
The
The
last.
year before he started 5 games, I think, when Breeze was hurt.
So, I mean, during that time, say what you will, people had their opinions. It was fun. It was different. It was interesting. I think the part that I enjoyed thoroughly as an analyst and at that time still writing with Saints News was it was something we had never seen in the Drew Brees, really the Sean Payton era, because, Drew was hurt, but we're like, we've always had Drew. What is this going to look like? And it was 1,000% different. It was taking a 180 turn.
Mhm.
It was fun. And then you realized you can't win games like this all the time, And at that point, you realized, okay, Taysom's better off being the Swiss Army knife. And Taysom's an entertaining player. Shoot, I remember the stat came across as well. He's the first player in modern NFL history to have 9 passing touchdowns, 9 rushing touchdowns, and 9 receiving touchdowns across a career. And obviously he has more. I think he has 9 receiving touchdowns, like 10 or 11 passing touchdowns, and then like 20 something rushing touchdowns. I mean, it's ridiculous. But that's where the Saints are going to thrive if they can find that role for him. And Bob and I have talked so much about whether Kamara misses time or not, and we fully expect him to miss time this year due to suspension. So even if he does, you're looking at Jamal Williams, Kendre Miller, Eno Benjamin, Taysom Hill. That's not shabby in terms of guys that can play H-back, line up in the slot, line both of them up with a quarterback. There's going to be a lot of fun things to do. So all in all, I think it's good to see Taysom still doing multiple things. I find it interesting that Dennis still says he doesn't have a defined role, because it essentially tells me what we already knew.
Yeah.
But I think that's a positive thing. Let's see. I want to get to some of these. Hey, Jerry. I saw Anna said hello.
Yeah. Hey, Jerry. Hey, Anna.
John. How's it going, my friend? I think he called us the Killer Bees. Yeah, the Killer Bees.
I'll take it.
That's interesting.
Been called worse.
Been called a lot worse. It starts with a B. What? Jerry asked, are you guys moving the show to Thursdays now? No, I will take the blame for the last couple weeks. I've had things on my schedule. Last night was a graduation. My girlfriend's high school graduated, and it was her first graduating class since she came on as a teacher. So she definitely wanted to see her American Sign Language students through. So we took the night to go down to, for us, Bojangles Coliseum in Charlotte and take part in that. And Jerry said he had a good birthday on Wednesday, so happy belated.
Happy belated, Jerry. Although, and yeah, folks, this is something that Brendan and I have talked about in private now, kicked around in private for a couple of weeks. And we do, as a show, we do have a big announcement, a huge announcement, we think, coming around the corner very soon. Obviously we'll keep you guys, our family, abreast of that situation. But the question I wanted to throw out there is, do you prefer your Bayou Blitz on Wednesday nights or Thursday nights? That's the idea Brendan and I have been kicking around, perhaps moving the show to Thursday or maybe keeping it on Wednesday. A couple of things a couple of factors that we're weighing in. Obviously, Thursday night football during the regular season, and anytime our Saints play, obviously we bring you the Bayou Blitz pregame show anyway, so that will just be our show that week. But would that cut into viewership? Would Thursday night football, when the Saints don't play, cut into viewership? How many other Saints podcasts, and I know that there's a few, how many other Saints podcasts are we competing with on Wednesday? So we'd love to hear your feedback, not only in the comments tonight, but message Brendan and I, on our social medias, throw it on our Bayou Blitz Facebook page, help us put a poll out there. We're spitballing the decision right now. We've not come to anything concrete. We don't have to at the moment because it's the off season, but we'd certainly like to make the decision before the start of the regular season. So just help us with that decision if you don't mind.
Absolutely, and I'll drop a Twitter poll as well. So hopefully, between all that, we can make an ultimate decision. For us, at the end of the day, whatever benefits you guys more is what we're gonna go with.
Mm-hmm.
I think the both of us are fortunate enough to have some pretty flexible schedules, and we're gonna be able to make it work, regardless. So.
Yeah.
We'll make it happen. Going to the other player that has a name on the screen, and Alvin Kamara. Obviously, I kind of alluded to it. He's expected to be suspended for some time this upcoming season, but he's out on the field for the first time with Derek Carr and some of his other new teammates. Bob, based off what you've seen, what you've heard, does Alvin Kamara look to be in Alvin Kamara-like shape? And what are you hearing out of Saints camp right now?
Yeah, Alvin Kamara always comes into mini camp and training camp in phenomenal shape. He works out with his own training staff all off season. Works out fanatically, might I add. I haven't seen any recently, but there are some YouTube videos of his off season workouts, and they are absolutely insane. Kyle Mosley and I had the opportunity, the privilege, to interview Alvin's primary trainer, Dr. Reef, once or twice, and he gave us some insight into what kind of things Alvin does during the off season, in his training regimen. And like I said, it's just crazy. So I wasn't worried about Alvin Kamara coming into shape, and his connection with Derek Carr looks absolutely phenomenal. I realize, of course, there are no defenses coming at you with ill will or ill intention, so keep that in mind, folks. But the skill position and the quarterback work are the things to really pay the only attention to, during these OTAs and mini camp, and the Carr to Kamara connection, man, it looks special. And even Derek Carr himself, who has played with a very, very good running back in Josh Jacobs while with the Raiders, Carr has admitted that Kamara is just something out of this world, out of the ordinary, and what he does is just not normal. Will that translate to the regular season game plans? Obviously, with Kamara facing a certain suspension, probably to start the year, that part of the Saints' offensive scheme will be delayed a little bit, but I'm hoping that Pete Carmichael is taking a little bit of notice, not only of the Carr-Kamara rapport during this part of the offseason, but also going back and watching the film of his own units the last 2 or 3 years and realizing that this team has not utilized Alvin Kamara's best skill sets, and that Derek Carr as the quarterback can bring out Alvin Kamara's best skill sets. Are you encouraged that we're going to see a more versatile, more dynamic receiving numbers out of Kamara in 2023, or are you just kind of waiting to see if Carmichael actually brings it to fruition?
That's tough, because I think part of me wants to say the latter, and that's simply because Carmichael's play calling was lackluster, if we want to be nice about it, last year. But you look at the years in which Kamara's receiving numbers have not been up to his standards, obviously last year, but there's some other years as well you can look back at and go, okay, like, what happened there? And you look at the Saints depth chart at wide receiver, and I see a correlation there as well. The lack of receiver talent means that defenses can hone in, and make it a little bit more difficult to get the ball to Kamara in open space. Now, this year, the Saints receiving room looks really good. Guys are going to get cut that would, in my opinion, probably make another 53-man roster, whether that be a guy like Traquan Smith, whether that be a guy like Washington, who they just picked up. Brian Edwards would be a guy that, could be on a roster bubble. I mean, the list goes on, right? That's a good thing. Saints haven't had that a whole lot lately. And obviously, with the injuries and whatnot, last year, that was unprecedented, and that's not going to happen year in and year out. So I think, right, and the quarterback situation the last couple of years as well, knock on wood. So having a guy who is a multi-time Pro Bowler at quarterback on your roster, a guy that has proven to make the players around him better, to have a much better receiving corps on paper. Of course, we haven't seen it all together. And health, I think all those things play a factor into whether Alvin Kamara is going to be back at that level of elite elite receiver out of the backfield. So I'm encouraged that that's going to happen. Now, you're only going to see spurts of it because Kamara is going to get 6-8 games, something in that wheelhouse. But when he does come back, I think you're in to see some special stuff. And I honestly, and I don't think I've ever said this since we talked about this potential suspension, it almost is a blessing in disguise for the Saints, because it allows you the opportunity to see what you have in Kendre Miller.
Mm-hmm.
It allows you the opportunity to see what you have in Eno Benjamin, Merritt, whatever other receivers, could potentially fight for a roster spot, and toy around and see, are any of these guys in a position where they fit this role well? It's also going to get Miller NFL experience immediately.
Yeah.
So where if Kamara was healthy, I think you'd use Miller a little bit more sparingly. At this point, he's going to be a running mate with Williams. So in a weird way, you could twist that to a positive thing.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Anna asked, don't you think lack of talent had a lot to do with the lackluster? Yes. Wow. She read my mind as I was saying everything. Anna and I, same page. Yeah, a lot of the lack of talent, a lot of the lack of receiver talent, the lack of health. Like I said, all those things played into the lackluster play calling to an extent. But there were also plenty of times where the team was entirely healthy enough to not have lackluster play calling. I think I would have given more of a pass for lackluster play calling to the season prior, the starting quarterback year. I would have had more understanding of a lackluster play calling because you were dealing with much different types of quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Like Jameis was much different than Simeon. Simeon was much different than Taysom, and Taysom much different than the one game of Ian Book. All those guys are very different in what their strengths are. So I'd understand lackluster play calling more that season than last season.
Yeah. I'd agree with that. And obviously one fed into another. I mean, you had Michael Thomas out for the year again, after 3 games. You had, Jarvis Landry, even when on the field, he was an absolute non-factor. And you had a Mark Ingram that was a shadow of his former self. And I've talked about this in regards to Kamara, and his receiving out of the backfield quite a bit. The Saints, outside of Taysom Hill, the Saints really didn't have a complementary backfield threat to Kamara. So as a result, when you moved Kamara out of the backfield, you almost telegraphed what you were doing. Now it is on Pete Carmichael to come up with new different ways to get your star open. I mean, that's coaching 101. You devise ways to get your best playmakers their best opportunities to make plays. So I do still fault Carmichael, but yeah, the lack of weaponry at the skill position certainly played a part. The injuries along the offensive line certainly played a part. But the quarterback stability, like you said, Brendan, there was no quarterback stability in 2021. Say what you will about Andy Dalton. At least he brought stability to the position after Jameis Winston was hurt. So I don't want to hear a quarterback carousel as an excuse for poor play calling in last season. The lack of weapons at the skill positions, I can excuse that a little. The injuries along the offensive line, especially at the 2/3 point of the year, also a primary reason. But the Saints addressed both of those in big, big ways this offseason. So there, in my opinion, there is no excuse for Pete Carmichael now.
Exactly. Definitely on the same page. Let's talk a little bit about Derek Carr. Yeah, we could
Well,
talk
I
about
do, but I hate to sorry to interrupt you. I do want to get our fans up to date on some personnel moves that the Saints made today. They signed 3 players: center Billy Price, a former first-round draft choice, and wideouts Kiki Kute, formerly of the Houston Texans, well, last of the Indianapolis Colts, and Lynn Bowden Jr. So they added a lot more depth to that receiving core, that already has, as you said, Traquan Smith fighting for a roster spot, along with the free agent additions of James Washington, Brian Edwards, and the draft pick A.T. Perry. To coincide with those three signings, the Saints released Malik Flowers, a little bit of a surprise, one of their backup offensive linemen, and undrafted rookie running back Sir Roderick Thompson. So that gets you caught up to date on all the personnel moves that the Saints made on today, their last day of minicamp.
Kiki is an interesting one. Smaller receiver, definitely a guy that could play in the slot well. Guy you could move around the offense as well. Never really found a home in the NFL. I want to say, was he a Texas Tech guy?
He was, yes.
So obviously very familiar with the air raid type of offense, getting it out there, running all over the field. Not a guy I see making the roster, but I hate the term camp body.
So do I.
Without going on a whole rant, I hate the term camp body because these guys are not signed with the intention of, we're just going to cut them.
Yeah.
Like they are signed with the intention of, let's see what we got. They might be signed with the thought like they're probably not going to make the roster, but let's see if they surprise us. Right? Nobody gets signed with the intention, we're just going to use you for a couple weeks and then we're just going to let you go. Like they're doing their due diligence, they're doing their homework, and obviously they did enough due diligence and enough homework to warrant, I want to see more of this guy.
Yeah.
I hate the term camp body because these guys are literally fighting for their NFL lives, right? They wouldn't, how do I put this? If I'm in the shoes as one of these guys that's fighting for their NFL lives, if I'm a guy like Kiki who's had a couple stops in the NFL, hasn't really found my footing, still think I'm an NFL talent, don't want to go the USFL route, don't want to go the XFL route, don't want to go the Canadian route, and I think I still deserve a spot in the NFL, why the heck would I sign with a team that I think is just going to cut me at the end of it?
Right.
Why wouldn't I either find an option with another team that I think I have a better shot of making the roster with, or just taking my talents to the USFL or Canada, who, and we've had 2 guys on this show that have spent time in the CFL, in Willie Whitehead and Delvin Breaux, and they will both tell you that Canada, in some extents, is a tougher league than the NFL, and does not get enough credit. So, especially for receivers and DBs, because they throw the ball more than any other league. So why would you not go up there and give yourself a shot? See what I'm saying? So camp bodies, I hate the term.
I hate it too. And a lot of the people that say it are the same kind of people that probably called Willie Snead a camp body, Lance Moore a camp body, Kyrie Robinson, Chris Ivory, were camp bodies. So yeah, I roll my eyes. I roll my eyes at the term. Technically, folks, they're all camp bodies. If you want to get technical about that. But no, you're right. I mean, obviously it's easy for anybody to sit there and look at the Saints roster at the wide receiver position, and say, okay, Michael Thomas, Rashid Shaheed, Chris Olave, those are 3 guaranteed spots. You cannot, none of you can look me in the eye and say that you can guarantee that the other 2 or 3 receiver spots or any other positions that the Saints are going to have. If you knew that, then you're doing whatever you're doing for a living. You're doing it wrong, because you need to switch professions and become an NFL general manager. Because I promise you, you don't know. This wide receiver spot, along with some other positions on the Saints team, is going to be some heavy competition throughout the remainder of the summer and probably into the early portion of the regular season for roster spots.
Absolutely. We could stick with receiver and talk about Michael Thomas. I think we've talked enough about Mike the last couple shows, especially with him getting back out on the field. Not doing a whole lot, but enough. I do want to talk about Derek Carr, though, and specifically the comments he made about studying Drew Brees. Made a lot of fans excited, rightfully so. What do you take out of that? Obviously, a lot of quarterback study, a lot of quarterback tape, not just their own, but anybody that they would like to model their game after. And I know that Carr and Brees have maintained a relationship since their playing days. What do you take from those comments that Derek Carr has been watching some tape and trying to pick some things out of the game of the greatest New Orleans Saints ever?
First of all, Derek Carr is obviously a very smart man. To go out of his way and say that he is studying Drew Brees' game and what Drew Brees did well very closely is obviously going to endear himself with the fan base who he now plays for. So that's extremely intelligent of him. But it also makes a lot of sense. Derek Carr has a certain skill set that a lot of what he does well is a lot of what Drew Brees did better than most quarterbacks who have ever played. So for Derek to say, okay, Drew, I do this well. Drew did it better than anybody who's ever played. I'm going to watch him to see how I can improve my strengths. And not only that, Drew Brees was such a prolific quarterback in this offensive system with this offensive coordinator for, since 2016, for 15 years. So Derek would be out of his mind not to study what Drew Brees did in this system, because the Saints brought Derek Carr in because they identified his skills with fitting in well with what they want to do as an offense. So, as you said, Brendan, nobody did it better than Drew Brees in this offense ever. Derek studying what Drew liked to do, what Drew did well, what Drew didn't do well, in this offense, it only makes sense. Obviously Drew also played and had tons of success with Alvin Kamara, Michael Thomas, Taysom Hill. So those are teammates now of Derek Carr. So again, it would be foolhardy not to study what kind of chemistry Drew had with those players, not to talk to Drew and pick Drew's brain, not to talk to Alvin, Michael, Taysom, pick their brains on what they like to do, what they like to do with Drew, what they did, what their fallback was in certain situations, especially key and crucial situations. So, what Derek Carr is doing is obviously, very intelligent. What he's saying, so the fans can hear him, is even more intelligent.
Right. Well, I don't know if you can say at this point that he's replacing Drew because you've had a lot of quarterbacks in between, but to be the first franchise cornerstone at quarterback since Drew, at least on paper, you sign him for this long, you pay him that much money. Obviously, that's the hope. There's a lot of pressure with that. There's shoes to fill. You're always going to be compared to. You might as well get the fan base on your side from the jump. Very smart move. My follow-up to that, with all the great comments that you had and analysis on that, is, would it surprise you at all? Remember, the Saints did have John Gruden in as a consultant at one point already. Would it surprise you at all if Drew Brees comes in and works alongside Derek Carr at any point during the offseason or the regular season, seeing a Drew Brees visit in the Saints camp?
It wouldn't surprise me at all, Brendan. As a matter of fact, I would be I don't know what Drew is doing, these days in retirement. Obviously, he's spending time with his family. But I would be disappointed if Drew didn't come in and spend a little bit of time with Derek Carr and all those quarterbacks, at some point in Saints training camp. Obviously, you don't want your legend, who a lot of these guys have played with, hanging around too long, because that creates an awful big shadow, for Derek Carr, Jay Kane, or Jameis Winston. But to bring him in for 2-3 days, maybe even a week, I think it can do nothing but good things for your new quarterback, for your system, for your entire team. And I've gone out on a limb and saying that I expect Drew Brees to be a quarterback coach somewhere, if either in at the college ranks or the NFL. So that would also be a little bit of help for Drew. We know the Saints have brought in former players as coaching interns over the last few years. In the terms of Zach Strief and now Jari Evans, it turned out to translate into permanent positions on the coaching staff. Ted Ginn Jr. was in minicamp this week helping the receivers. Sterling Moore was a coaching intern before, unfortunately for Sterling, he was let go today. So I'm not saying that Drew Brees could or even should be a coach on this staff, but I do think the coaching is in Drew Brees' future, and I think that bringing him into, I don't want to say mentor, but work with Derek Carr and the rest of that Saints offense, I think it would be a spectacular move.
I might be on the other side of this, but I really liked what Drew had potential-wise as a commentator. Obviously, one of the last times you and I spoke with Drew, I asked him about at what point did he realize this is something he could do. And he gave a beautiful answer about being at a Purdue game, being interviewed, and they kind of asked him during his interview in the booth, like, "Hey, what do you see?" And he broke it down. He realized, "Hey, like this is what this is. This is definitely something I could do." Now, I know it didn't work out, the initial contract that he had with NBC, but we saw moments, and maybe not so much being in the booth, but we saw moments sitting at the desk, and I think that's where Drew could be really, really good.
Yeah.
And specifically one moment with Fox, and I believe he was at a Purdue game, and he broke down 2 plays with Reggie Bush at the desk with him. And it was almost as if Drew like traveled in time in his head, breaking those plays down. Obviously, he's with a former teammate. He knows exactly. And they brought up the divisional round game in 06 where Reggie just got absolutely blown to shreds against Philadelphia. Drew explained that one, and then explained the NFC Championship game in 06, the 88-yard touchdown to Reggie, and just hearing how he dissected everything there. And obviously the years that we sat in media with Drew as well. I mean, so articulate, so intelligent, understood the game. If we could get that at a desk, whether it's NBC, Fox, ESPN, I don't care, I still think he has a really bright future there. And that's saying a lot, because I've worked with a lot of guys over the years, in an analyst chair on live broadcasts that were former players. I'm like, yeah, you're a former player. You definitely understand the game. This is not for you, bro. And it works for some people, and some people it doesn't. I really think Drew has it. So I hope to see him at that spot, but I also would not be surprised if he gets a phone call from a friend in Sean Payton and is like, "Hey, would you like to have a coaching intern opportunity with me out here in Denver?" Or, if somebody on the New Orleans staff, if it's Dennis, or, I don't know, I guess Mickey has plenty of pull to be able to say, "Hey, let's bring Drew in for a little bit." That wouldn't surprise me either, but I do think he has a potential career if that's something he wants to do. In commentary, I just think he's too bright of a mind not to have that type of opportunity. So quarterbacks we've talked about Taysom, we've talked about Derek Carr, we've talked about Alvin Kamara. Let's talk about this mini camp. It's short, just like OTAs. It's extremely short, but you get to see everybody there. I want to talk about post mini camp and even into training camp signings, right? We haven't talked about that a whole lot, but my last look at the salary cap is the Saints had somewhere around $14 million. And there are still some positions that, if you ask me, the Saints still need to address. So, Bob, have about 10 minutes left until 10 o'clock. You and I know we both typically go over, but we'll keep an eye on the clock anyway. Let's talk about some potential targets for the Saints at this point and how your mindset changes in free agency once you hit that post mini camp, pre training camp type of window we're about to hit. First, let's talk about that. If you're a GM or the experience you've had in coaching and obviously in covering the NFL over the years, how does your mindset change the closer you get to the season about bringing new players in?
When the Saints entered this offseason, they obviously targeted specific positions and specific players, of need. And by all accounts, they did a spectacular job at at checking off both boxes. Obviously, they got their quarterback. They have they got their running back depth, with Jamal Williams. They reconfigured the defensive tackle position, with Shepard, and Saunders, and obviously they bolstered all those positions in the draft too, with Brzee, Isaiah Foskey to replace Malcolm or Marcus Davenport, at defensive end, and drafting Kendre Miller. So at this point, you're always identifying potential needs and potential roster openings. I don't care at what point in the season that you're at, but at this point in the off season, I've had a chance to look at my roster through OTAs. I've had the entire roster in during mini camp, and now I'm preparing for training camp. And now, there's this lull that everybody thinks that they have, not the front office people, not the coaches, folks. This is, in some ways, this is their toughest work, because they're identifying the free agents that are still out there. They've gotten an albeit short look at what they have at the roster so far. And at this point, if I'm Dennis Allen or any assistant on that staff, I'm identifying certain positions, and I know we'll get into it specifically in a minute. I'm identifying a couple positions where I'm not sure about depth, especially inexperienced depth might be a concern to me. I've had a chance to see those players now in OTAs and mini camps, so I'm now going to sit down with the rest of my coaches and say, okay, if we had to go into the regular season tomorrow, are you okay with so-and-so backing up Demario Davis and Pete Werner? Because I see you fidgeting in your seat, and I know that's where you want to go first. Are you okay with DeMarco Jackson and Zach Bond filling in for Caden Ellis, who we lost in the offseason? Are you okay with all the new faces we brought in at safety, or do you think we need more? How about the receiver room? We have it's flooded over right now, but is there enough talent there? What about offensive line? We've been battered there by injuries. Do we feel confident enough that if that happens again, that this depth is experience, that we have enough experienced quality depth to step in and keep this offense humming? Those are the kind of questions that these guys are going to be asking themselves for really the next 6 weeks.
Yeah, well, let's start at some of those. I'll try to remember all of them that you listed off real quick. I think receiver, you're fine. Obviously, we just talked about Kiki coming in. I'm surprised that was even a thing because, like you said, the receiver room's overflowing with talent, guys that have been on your roster before, which I think is always valuable when you go into camp as well. Guys that are just familiar. There's not as much of a learning curve, whether they're going to be guys that make your roster, make your practice squad roster, right? So I think receiver, you're okay. Offensive line's an interesting one. I'm a firm believer you can never have too much offensive line depth. And the Saints have brought in some interesting talent. They brought in a former first-round pick, like you mentioned before, today. So I think obviously that was a position of need, and they found a guy who at one point had a really high grade on him.
Mm-hmm.
And just trying to see where he is now. Linebackers one, and like what DeMarco Jackson can be, and we've talked about it a lot. I mean, how comes down this show? small schools, North Carolina small schools. That's my bread and butter. I love seeing guys succeed from this part of the country, and especially the small schools, because FCS produces talent just like anybody else does. However, I don't know where DeMarco is. I mean, the Saints do because he's been in their building. I haven't had a chance to speak with or see DeMarco returning from injury. That's a concern. Zach Bond, we have talked about a couple times over the last year, is a guy that is uber athletic, that has yet to show me and prove to me that he is capable of being an inside linebacker at the NFL level. I think he's found a forever home on special teams, and that's fine. I have to say that again. For a third-round pick, for first-round picks, if it doesn't work out, but you can find a living on special teams, you're living the dream, right? You're still living your NFL dream. And for a third-round pick in Zach Bond, shoot, there's a lot of third-round picks that don't even make the roster anymore. Mm-hmm. He found a home, and that's okay. He's uber athletic, and he's good there. In terms of him getting like a lot of snaps at linebacker, I'm a little weary. Saints fans are, and we kind of talked about this, maybe it was last week, with recency bias. Was that last week or the week before? But
I think last week.
Right. So recency bias. We're talking about something from last week. I think recency bias plays in with free agents a lot, and potential guys that could come onto the roster. So I think, very naturally Saints fans are like, well, Quan Alexander's still a free agent. Why not just bring him into camp? I don't typically agree with people with recency bias. And I think a lot of times I'm the very first person to be like, there's a reason they're a free agent, right? This is what I'm actually agreeing with Saints fans on. It does not hurt at all to at least bring the guy into camp. See where he is. I know he's getting older. He's probably lost a step or two, but he had some moments for New York last year. Mm-hmm. Had a lot of good moments. He has a really good relationship with Demario Davis. Might as well bring him into camp. If he understands what his role would be if he made the team, might as well bring him into camp. I think linebacker is definitely a position of need. Safety, I'm good at. As weird as that sounds, I know it's a lot of new faces, but it's a lot of talent back there. I'm good there. So I think you could always get defensive line depth, right? I think that was one thing. We talked about Frank Clark for a little bit, whether he's going to be coming to New Orleans or not. And obviously that didn't happen, but talking about just any sort of depth to go alongside Cameron Jordan was going to be important. I still think that's a position that they could address. I don't really know what's out there at this point, but I still think it's a position they can address.
Yannick Ngakoue, as far as big name free agents, but he's reportedly seeking a contract with a yearly average of $15 million or more. So no.
So just call Jadeveon Clowney and see if he still wants that $20 million a year. I'm just
he is out there. He is out there.
I would. That's one of the greatest, in my opinion, and given I was around this area when he was in college, it's one of the greatest. I'm just bigger and faster and stronger than everybody in college, and then everybody caught up with me.
Yep.
Type of examples.
Yep.
That doesn't mean he wasn't like a super talented dude, but he wasn't far and away the number one pick. And that's just, people buy into hype. People buy into the one hit against Michigan because that was crazy.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, everybody caught up to him. I've
always thought that Jadeveon Clowney was an uber talented player, like tons of dripping with raw athleticism, but lazy, extremely lazy.
Never had to work for it because he was always bigger, faster, stronger than everybody. Yep. And then he got to the league and realized, oh my God, everybody else is bigger, stronger, and faster. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, I still think he could be productive as a rotational defensive lineman. As a guy, it's like, hey, it's third down, go get you a sack. So I think that's where he's at in his career. Is he a bust? You make a Pro Bowl or two.
Yeah, I think he did.
I think when you're drafted that high, as long as you make a Pro Bowl or two, you're okay. Unless you're a quarterback. Quarterback, there's a different standard.
Yeah.
But when you're a defensive lineman taking top 5, just make a couple of Pro Bowls. Like, you're going to be okay. Nobody's going to remember in 20 years. You know, another good example. Nobody talks about Mario Williams being a bust. You know what I mean? Like, there's not as much pressure when you're a defensive lineman
I
taking.
guess not.
Just make a couple Pro Bowls. Do something. It'll be okay.
But I'll tell you, going back to what you said about Quan and linebacker, it shocks me how many big names are still available as off-ball linebackers.
Yeah.
It's not only Quan, but Rashawn Evans, Zach Cunningham, Miles Jack, Deion Jones, Anthony Barr, Jared Davis. They are all have started significant amount of games in this league with success. And I agree. I love DeMarco Jackson, and I trust that these defensive coaches know what they want and know what they're doing. But it is a little bit curious why they haven't brought in some experience at linebacker to kind of bolster that position, especially when you consider that Pete Werner has missed some games over both of his first 2 years.
Yeah. I didn't realize Miles Jack was still available. He was huge part of that Jacksonville team that made the AFC title in what year was that?
17.
17. And they should have went to the Super Bowl off a missed call, right? So, which I think he was a part of. Wasn't there a fumble? And it was a fumble, but it was ruled not a fumble.
I mean, you're dealing with the New England Patriots, so that's certainly fact.
Certainly right. Yeah, certainly right. I think it was Miles Jack who picked it up and ran it back, and they called it back, and they blew it dead or something. I don't remember, something like that. Anyway, let's end today with some daughter drop. We've talked a lot about just catching up everybody with what's going on in Saints mini camp, and seeing some new faces or new to this year's offseason faces. There's got to be a better way to phrase that.
Yeah.
Seeing faces we have not seen since last season. There we go. Yeah, it's late. It's fine. It's fine. It's whatever. Let's end with daughter drop. Dot or drop. It's way too early, but dot or drop. Kendre Miller will turn heads at training camp for the Saints this year.
Dot. I think he will. In fact, I'm very confident that he will. His health is a little bit of a concern to me. He missed OTAs while recovering from an injury that caused him to miss the national championship game. So that's something to keep an eye on. But assuming he is healthy, I think he is going to show Saints fans why this team coveted him so much, why they bypassed other more popular names at running back in the third round, to bring in Kendre Miller. So I'm definitely going dot.
All right.
Dot or drop. I released an article for Saints News Network this morning, kind of piggybacking off an NFL.com article naming Derek Carr as a dark horse preseason MVP candidate. Now, past your usual candidate of popular girls at the prom, Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Aaron Rodgers, Justin Herbert, etc. Outside of them, dot or drop. You buy Derek Carr as a potential preseason, albeit dark horse MVP candidate.
I'll say dot, and I'll say it kind of with a grain of salt, because we did the same thing for Jameis a couple years ago. And then even the year that Jameis was playing really well and then got hurt, he wasn't producing MVP-like numbers. Right. He was producing a game or two that really blew everybody away, specifically 5 touchdowns against Green Bay, but was just managing the game, doing enough to win. And I think that's what Derek Carr, I expect Derek Carr to throw for somewhere around 4,000 yards, but I don't expect it to be 4,000 yards, 45 touchdowns, right? I expect 4,000 yards, 31 touchdowns, good season, Pro Bowl-like season, not an MVP season. And then we talked about recency bias. You want to talk about recency bias? Mahomes, and rightfully so. I mean, the dude's uber talented, right?
He is.
he's already separated himself from like the rest of these quarterbacks in terms of where he's going to land all time. Like he could retire tomorrow and probably be in Canton, no problem. Now I do look at guys like Burrow, who, is going to be up there. Josh Allen, who got the Madden cover. Guys like that, I think, are well above Derek Carr on that list. But in terms of like dark horses, I could see Carr being in that conversation. But in the long run, I don't see him winning MVP or even being in the running for it. Even if the Saints have a good year, even if the Saints win 13 games, I don't see Derek Carr being in that conversation. The other part of that is, well, let's be honest, Bob. We've both covered this team for a long time. You know exactly where I'm going with that. I don't even have to say it. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So, all right, one more each side. Dot or drop? Dot or drop that Rashid Shaheed moves off of kickoff / punt return duties because someone else shines enough in camp. And he's valued that high as a receiver.
I'm going to drop. I think that's what the Saints hope happens. I think that's one of the reasons why the Kiki and Lynn Bowden were signed today, even though they did release Malik Flowers. I don't see anybody on the roster right now that has the explosiveness that Shaheed could have as a returner. I think they would love for someone to step up, so that way that Rashid could just concentrate on being a number 3 receiver and taking the offensive reps. But I don't see it happening consistently. So I do see plenty of other players getting opportunities, but I don't see Shaheed moving away from being a returner altogether for this team. So I'll drop.
All right.
A daughter drop. The New Orleans Saints have had, for all the talented defensive players for this franchise, they've only had one defensive player of the year. That was in 1991, Pat Swilling. Should be in the Hall of Fame. Criminal that he isn't.
Amen.
That changes this year. I'm not even going to name a specific defender because there's loads of talented ones. The Saints will have the 2023 Defensive Player of the Year.
Drop, unfortunately. I mean, your head goes to a couple places right out the gate, right? Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Marshawn Lattimore. I want to say historically, that award goes to whoever sacks the quarterback the most.
Pretty much, yeah.
Historically, right? So, I mean, Lattimore could have a shutdown season and not get it. Like, I look at, you want a good example for corners, like just not getting love during some of their prime, is you look at some of the years for like Richard Sherman, where he was locking up guys, but wasn't getting interception numbers and just didn't get enough love. I think the primest example of that is Darrelle Revis.
Yeah.
Right. Like Revis never had the interception numbers, but it was because nobody threw the ball that way because he was that good. And he'll never get the love that he deserves as a DB either because the interception numbers aren't there, which is criminal to him. And the Jets, yeah, they made like back-to-back AFC championship games while he was on the roster, but they were bad teams.
Yeah.
Right. And if it wasn't for Revis in that defense, they would have had no business being in the AFC championship because Mark Sanchez wasn't taking them there. But yeah, I mean, Lattimore could have, shoot, was it Diggs? Diggs had however many interceptions last year, the year before. No conversation for that award.
Nope.
Demario Davis, it took him this long just to make a freaking Pro Bowl. Like, it's not going to happen. And then for Cam's always been this criminally underrated defensive end in this era, and all time, right? Like people are gonna look back in 10 years and be like, really? Like Cameron Jordan? That high on the sack list? That people are gonna look back and be shocked. And I think because of that too, I mean, at the same time, Cam, I hope you're listening. I hope you write this down. I just don't see Cam having a double-digit sack year.
Ooh.
Um,
Ooh.
because he's struggled to do that lately, and the Saints have not put someone on the opposite side of him to take pressure off of him. I think he'll have a lot of sack influences, right? Which is like a new analytical thing, which I really like, because you could have guys that don't get credit for the sack, but they influence the sack, or the pressure influences the quarterback to move, which ends up in the arms of insert defensive tackle here. I think Cam's going to have a lot more of those than he will actual sacks this year. I could see him being around 8.5, 9 with sack influences that total up to be like 13, 14, whatever. I just don't see him being in a position where it's like an Aaron Donald type of year, or even like some of those like vintage JJ Watt years. I just don't see it at his age and what he's going to be expected to do for this defense. It's not the same pin your ears back and go get them. It's going to be, you're going to be so responsible for the run game as well. And he's going to go underappreciated per usual, unfortunately. So long-winded way of saying drop. Those would be my 3 candidates. So I guess I felt like I had to explain myself. But tis what it is.
No, you know what? I feel the same way. And those are the 3 candidates that I had in mind when I said it. Outside of the sack guys, I think Marshawn Lattimore could get more opportunities for interceptions and breakups this year if Alontae Taylor and Paulson Debo are as good as we think they're going to be.
Yeah.
Demario off-ball linebackers, they just don't get love, and Demario especially doesn't get love. And Cam might have that potential, but like you said, he's never been, the year Swilling got it, he had 17.5 sacks.
Yeah.
The defensive linemen the last few years, the edge rushers and defensive tackles that have gotten it, they're hovering around 18 to 20 sacks. I see Cam getting potentially 10 to 12 sacks at the high point this year. I can't see him at that 18 to 20 range though. If he does, that'd be great. And we'd be screaming if he does, screaming foul if he doesn't get MVP. But I think Cam, Demario, and Lattimore are going to continue being what they've always been, among the league's best at their positions. But as long as they're wearing the fleur-de-lis on the side of their head, they have to do statistically exponentially better than what everybody else is, instead of just very, very good.
Well, and even when people break like NFL records, and should be the MVP of the league, they're not.
Yep, that's what I'm glad you took that hint.
Hey man, listen, that is our favorite Saints team of all time in 2011, and I will shout from the mountaintops for the rest of my life that 2011 MVP should have been Drew Brees, and it was. And last rant, because I love talking about this, is one of my favorite topics in NFL history, is because it wasn't close. Like the voting wasn't close. Like Aaron Rodgers annihilated the voting, and I'm sitting here thinking, how?
Right?
Like I voted for awards in media before, right? Like I'm not to that extent, not to that level, but like conference championship, like first team, second team, and conference tournament MVP. Like I voted on those things, and never in my life have I been like, you know what, this guy led the conference, and let's just say baseball, for example, is probably one I voted on. Like this guy led the conference tournament in home runs and RBIs and batting average. But this guy's on base percentage was a little bit better. I'm going to vote for the guy who had a better on base percentage. And that's essentially what it was. It was like Rodgers had a better, I think it was like a better like quarterback rating that year, and had a better like touchdown to interception ratio, because he threw like 4 picks that year.
Right. But Brees
like,
threw 46 touchdowns, at the time 4th highest in NFL history, led the league in completion percentage, and biggest. This is what makes it untouchable and unfathomable that he didn't get it. He not only broke but shattered a 30-year-old NFL record that people thought was untouchable and didn't get any love.
I'm glad you said shattered, because he broke it by like 400 plus yards. And that's going to be crazy because, we played more games now. If someone to break now, it's now Peyton Manning's record by 1 yard.
And by the way, it shouldn't be.
Right, because
I've gone on that rant before, yeah.
Lateral, but the count anyway.
Yeah.
But if someone passes it now, like nobody in 20 years is going to look back and be like, well, they did it in less games, right? So that's a whole thing. Oh, and also Peyton Manning won MVP the very next season for breaking the passing record. So anyway, favorite debate ever. Bob and I can go on for hours on that. But that's the perfect example on why the Saints will not win some of those awards. And shoot, I mean, they got really lucky in, the year that Mike Thomas, so 19 awards. Yeah. Mike Thomas, 19 awards. The fact that he won Offensive Player of the Year. Like, they got really lucky that he broke a record that people thought would never be broken. Right? And he was like, but people were clowning him that year, even with 149 receptions and 1,700 yards, because he didn't hit double-digit touchdowns that year. I think he had 9.
He did.
But anyway, we'll throw this up on the screen before we go. Johnson, thanks, guys. I got to go to bed pissed tonight. You're welcome, John. That's our goal.
John, that's the way I go to bed every night, so welcome to my world.
Oh, man. Hey, I mean, I don't have it up. Maybe I'll bring it out for the next show and put it like right here, but I have Drew's jersey from that year, and it's like really hard to like display because you're like, you love that season, but you're also like, you got done so dirty.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, Bob, where can everybody follow our long-winded, angry rants about things that happened almost how long ago now? Almost 13 years ago now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so where can people follow our long-winded rants about things that are over a decade old?
Folks, you can follow Angry Bob on Facebook. Just look for Bob Rose. I'm over on Twitter at BobbyR2613. All of my works are published through the Saints News Network, at Saints News on Twitter, or the New Orleans Saints team page on the SI.com Sports Illustrated site. I also post my pieces on my personal pages. Make sure you guys continue to follow our Bayou Blitz Facebook page and Bayou Blitz Twitter page at Bayou Blitz Pod. Remember what we asked of you tonight. We want to hear from you guys, whether you feel more comfortable as far as live shows. You could always watch the replays. But as far as live shows on Wednesday or Thursday nights, we want to hear your opinion and factor that in before we make a concrete decision on when your show is going to be most every week. Some scheduled commitments, occasional shuffles notwithstanding. And by the way, continue to promote your Bayou Blitz pages, your Bayou Blitz show. You guys have done a spectacular job of that. We're growing rapidly, and we have only you to thank for that. So nothing but love for you, but we need your help to keep it going.
Yeah, and we have some big news hopefully on the way soon because of how great you guys have been in promoting the show. So we certainly appreciate that. For me, you can follow me Instagram, Twitter at BT Boylan. Per usual, like Bob said, follow us on Twitter at Bayou Blitz Pod. I will be throwing a poll tomorrow morning about what day you guys would rather have the show. So definitely vote there. Per usual, Bottom of the Lug Productions have done a lot of fun things. My friend Thomas Manning has continued to interview really cool people. So including Common, the hip hop and legend Common. Got to sit down with Thomas for about 5-10 minutes the other day. That podcast is up in association with Bottom of the Mug Productions. So go check that out. If you haven't already, check out the podcast we did with Bob on the Thoughts of Bruin podcast. Really awesome podcast. We have another one coming out with Lexi Thompson, who is a professional photographer amongst weddings and sports and like MLB sharing her photos online. So, no big deal for a young 20-year-old. We don't want to get her a big ego, but Lexi Thompson hung out with us, talked about how she got into photography, being from like a small farm in the Northeast. So that's a really cool conversation as well. Until next time, you guys keep following us on the Bayou Blitz. We will be returning to Wednesday nights next week, so make sure you're hanging out with us. And to all the Pelicans fans, I'll bring this up on Wednesday as well. If we don't have any news, there's rumors they're trying to move into the top 3 in the NBA draft. So make sure you keep your eyes and ears peeled. Obviously, check out Pelican Scoop on SI for that as well. But until next week, guys, find some peace, spread love, practice positivity. Bob and I will see you next Wednesday for another edition of the Bayou Blitz podcast.